The traffic here is something else, Emeka. It's Benin City. We've seen worse. True, but it never gets old. At least we've got the view.
There are some friendships that money cannot buy, and there are some friendships that money can destroy. But this story is about two young Nigerian men whose friendship was tested by something neither of them expected: money. Daniel and Emeka had been best friends since they were teenagers. They grew up together, struggled together, laughed together, and even went hungry together. Back then, neither of them had anything. One day, when they were still teenagers, Daniel had only 500 naira in his pocket. Emeka had nothing. Daniel could have bought food for himself and gone home. Instead, he bought 2 plates of rice. He gave one to Emeka, and when Emeka asked him what he would eat the next day, Daniel simply smiled and said, "If we are hungry tomorrow, we'll be hungry together." Those words became the foundation of their friendship. Years passed. They grew older. Emeka remained ambitious, always looking for opportunities to make money and change his life. Daniel, on the other hand, appeared to be living a very simple life. At least, that was what everybody thought. Daniel wore faded shirts. He wore old trousers. He moved around in cheap slippers. He used an old phone. And whenever people talked about money, Daniel behaved like someone who was struggling to survive. But there was one thing nobody knew. Daniel was a billionaire. Not the type that showed off on social media. Not the type that drove around looking for attention. Daniel had quietly built businesses in logistics, real estate, and technology. He owned expensive cars. He had properties in different cities. He even had access to a private jet. But he deliberately hid everything. Why? Because years earlier, Daniel had watched money destroy his own family. After his father's death, relatives who once ate from the same table began fighting over property. People who had once called themselves brothers became enemies. His mother had cried while watching the family fall apart. From that moment, Daniel made a decision. He would never allow money to determine who loved him. And that decision was about to change his life forever.
One evening, Daniel was walking through Benin City with Emeka when Emeka suddenly said something that caught his attention. He told Daniel about a woman named Amaka. Amaka was beautiful, intelligent, and from a wealthy family. But according to Emeka, she wasn't interested in rich men. She wanted a hard-working man, someone who would build with her. So Emeka decided to introduce his best friend to her. Later that evening, Daniel and Emeka arrived at Amaka's father's mansion. The moment Daniel saw the house, he became nervous. The mansion was enormous. Luxury cars were parked inside the compound. Everything looked expensive. Daniel looked at his faded shirt and laughed. But Emeka told him not to worry. A few moments later, Amaka walked out. She was beautiful, elegant, and confident. She looked at Daniel. Then she looked at Emeka. And Emeka introduced them. Daniel shook her hand. And surprisingly, Amaka didn't judge him by his appearance. Instead, she sat down with them and started talking. She asked Daniel what he did for a living. Daniel simply said, "Business." She asked what kind of business. He smiled and said, "Different things." Amaka laughed. Then she asked him a very interesting question. "If you suddenly had 1 million naira, what would you do with it?" Daniel posed. Then he gave her an answer that surprised her. He said he would invest it and use it to make another million. Amagasma. She liked his answer. And more importantly, she liked him. After they left, Emeka told Daniel that he believed Amaka was interested in him. Daniel laughed. But as they walked home that night, Daniel became unusually quiet. He remembered the promise he and Emeka had made years ago. They would always be there for each other, no matter what. Later that night, Daniel returned to his modest looking room. Isfonran. The moment he answered the call, his voice changed. He sounded completely different. The person on the other end told him that his private jet had landed. Daniel looked around his small room. Then he quietly instructed the caller to keep everything confidential. He ended the call. But he didn't know that someone had heard everything. Outside his room, Emeka was standing there. And he had heard only 2 words. Private jet.
That night, Emeka couldn't sleep. He kept asking himself the same question. Who exactly is Daniel? For years, he had believed that Daniel was struggling financially. Yet he had just heard someone talking to him about a private jet. The following morning, Emeka called Daniel. He tried to ask questions casually, but Daniel avoided every question, and that only made Emeka more suspicious. Meanwhile, Daniel had started spending more time with Amaka. For their first proper date, Daniel took her to a small roadside buka. Amaka looked around. She was surprised. She expected Daniel to take her somewhere expensive, but Daniel told her that she had said she wanted something simple. They ordered rice and chicken. They laughed. They talked. And for the first time in a long time, Amaka felt completely comfortable with a man. Most men she had met were always trying to impress her. Daniel wasn't. He didn't show off. He didn't talk about money. He didn't try to prove anything. And that was exactly what attracted her to him. But while Amaka was falling for Daniel, her father was becoming suspicious. Chief Okoro was a wealthy businessman, and he had one major concern. He didn't know who Daniel was. He warned Amaka that a good heart was important. But love alone could not solve every problem. He wanted his daughter to marry an established man. Amaka disagreed. She told him that Daniel was different. But Chief Okoro remained unconvinced. Meanwhile, Emeka's suspicion was growing stronger. Eventually, he confronted Daniel. He asked him directly about the private jet. Daniel denied knowing what he was talking about. Emeka wasn't convinced. Something was wrong. But before he could investigate further, something happened that changed everything. Amaka received a message from an unknown number. The message said, "Your Daniel is not who you think he is." Attached to the message was a photograph. It showed Daniel stepping out of a luxury car. Amaka stared at the picture in disbelief. She looked at Daniel's simple clothes, then back at the photograph. She couldn't understand what she was seeing. That night, she called Daniel, and when he arrived, she showed him the photograph. "Who owns this car?" Daniel looked at the picture. Then he looked at Amaka. He knew the secret was finally out. He could no longer hide. Amaka demanded an answer. "Are you rich?" Daniel said nothing. That silence was enough. Amaka's heart sank. She felt betrayed. She believed Daniel had deliberately allowed her to think he was poor. And Daniel finally realized. The test he created to discover genuine love. Daniel finally told Amaka the truth. He wasn't just comfortable. He was extremely wealthy. He owned companies. He owned properties. He had investments worth millions. And the luxury car in the photograph belonged to him. Amaka was stunned. She asked him why he had lied. Daniel explained that he never actually told her he was poor. He simply allowed her to believe it. He told her about his childhood. He told her how his father's death had exposed the worst side of his relatives. People who once called themselves family had fought over money. His mother had cried, and Daniel had watched the entire family fall apart. That experience changed him. He decided that he would never allow people to love him because of his money. Amaka listened, and slowly, she understood him. But while Amaka was learning the truth, Emeka was discovering something much bigger. He began investigating Daniel. He searched online. He looked through business records. And eventually, he discovered Daniel's company. The man he thought was struggling was actually a billionaire. Emeka sat in front of the computer in shock. He remembered all the times Daniel had helped him, the rent Daniel had paid, the emergencies Daniel had solved, the opportunities Daniel had created. And suddenly, another emotion entered his heart: jealousy. He began asking himself questions. Why had Daniel hidden all this from him? Why had Daniel allowed him to struggle while secretly having so much? And then something happened. Daniel asked Amaka to marry him. She accepted. When Emeka heard the news, he confronted Daniel. He accused Daniel of choosing Amaka over their friendship. Daniel couldn't understand. He reminded Emeka that they were brothers, but Emeka was angry. He told Daniel that he had been there when Daniel supposedly had nothing. And now he had discovered that Daniel had been wealthy all along. Daniel tried to explain, but Emeka walked away. That night, Emeka received a phone call from an unknown man. The man asked him a simple question. Are you still interested in marrying Amaka? Emeka froze. He asked who was calling. The man told him that he knew how to destroy Daniel, and he offered Emeka money. A lot of money. At first, Emeka refused. He remembered his friendship with Daniel. He remembered their childhood. He remembered the rise they once shared. But jealousy is dangerous, because when it enters the heart, it can make a good person do terrible things. Eventually, Emeka agreed to meet the mysterious man, and that meeting would change everything. The mysterious man was a wealthy businessman who had been trying to destroy Daniel's company for years. He wanted Daniel's businesses, but he needed someone close to Daniel, someone who knew his movements, someone who could access important information. And Emeka was perfect. He offered Emeka money. Emeka hesitated, but eventually, he accepted. That night, Emeka sat alone in his room. He held an old photograph of himself and Daniel. He remembered their childhood. He remembered Daniel sharing food with him. He remembered the rent Daniel had paid when he was almost thrown out of his university apartment. And for a moment, Emeka wanted to stop everything. But it was too late. He had already crossed the line. A few days later, Emeka secretly entered Daniel's office. He accessed confidential documents. He copied important business information, and he handed it over to the mysterious businessman. Soon after that, Daniel's company suffered a major financial attack. Millions of naira were at risk. Daniel immediately began investigating, and then he saw the security footage. It showed Emeka entering his office. Daniel couldn't believe it. His best friend had betrayed him. The same person he had trusted more than anyone had turned against him. Daniel called Emeka. When Emeka arrived, Daniel placed the evidence on the table. There was silence. Then Daniel asked one question. Why? Emeka finally broke down. He admitted that he was jealous. He said he felt that Daniel had everything while he was still struggling. He felt that Daniel had never really trusted him. Daniel listened. Then he said something that broke Emeka's heart. I never saw you as being beneath me. Daniel explained that he had hidden his wealth because he was afraid money would destroy their friendship. But now he realized something. Money had not destroyed their friendship. Jealousy had. Then Daniel revealed something unexpected. The mysterious businessman had been manipulating Emeka, and Daniel already knew who the real enemy was. He turned on the television. News was playing. The mysterious businessman had been arrested for fraud. Emeka stared at the screen. He suddenly realized that he had almost destroyed his oldest friendship for someone who never cared about him. But before Emeka could apologize, the office door opened. Amaka walked in. She had heard everything. She looked at Daniel, then at Emeka, and she held something tightly in her hand. A pregnancy test. Daniel's face changed. Emeka became completely silent. Amaka looked at both men. Then she said, I'm pregnant. But that wasn't the only thing she had come to say. She looked at Daniel with tears in her eyes. And then she said, I don't know if I can marry you anymore. The room became completely silent. Daniel stared at Amaka. He couldn't understand why she suddenly wanted to end the relationship. Amaka explained that she had realized something. Daniel had tested her love. Emeka had allowed jealousy to destroy his loyalty, and both men had allowed money to control their decisions. She told Daniel that she understood why he had hidden his wealth, but she also believed that true love required trust. Daniel lowered his head. He knew she was right. Then Amaka turned toward Emeka. She told him that jealousy had almost destroyed a friendship that had survived poverty, hardship, and years of struggle. Emeka began crying. He apologized. He admitted that he had allowed money to make him feel inferior. He admitted that he had betrayed the person who had always stood beside him. Daniel looked at him, and suddenly, he remembered their childhood. 2 boys, 1 plate of rice, 500 naira, and a promise. If we are hungry tomorrow, we'll be hungry together. Daniel walked toward Emeka. He stretched out his hand. Emeka looked at it. For several seconds, he didn't move. Then he took Daniel's hand. The 2 friends embraced. Years of anger and jealousy finally broke apart. Amaka watched them. She was crying, but this time, She was smiling. She understood something. Daniel wasn't perfect. Emeka wasn't perfect. But both men had finally learned the value of honesty, loyalty, and forgiveness. Months later, Daniel and Amaka got married. The wedding was beautiful. Chief Okoro proudly accepted Daniel into the family, and Emeka stood beside his best friend. The billionaire who once pretended to be poor was finally living openly. But despite all the luxury around him, Daniel remained the same man. One evening after the wedding, Daniel and Emeka sat together at a small Nigerian roadside restaurant. 2 plates of rice were placed in front of them. Emeka looked at Daniel and laughed. He asked him if, now that he was a billionaire, he would finally stop eating roadside rice. Daniel laughed. Then he pushed one plate toward Emeka. He reminded him of their childhood promise. Tomorrow, if they were hungry, they would still be hungry together. Years later, Daniel had a beautiful family. He had a successful business empire. He had everything money could buy. But one day, his young son asked him a question. "Daddy, how did you become rich?" Daniel smiled. He told him that hard work had made him wealthy. Then the boy asked another question. "How did you know Mummy loved you?" Daniel became quiet. He looked at Amaka. Then he looked at Emeka. And he smiled. He told his son, "I didn't." The boy looked confused. Daniel continued, "That's the problem with love. You can test someone's heart, but sometimes the test can break the very thing you're trying to protect." Daniel looked around the room. His wife was beside him. His son was smiling. And his best friend was sitting nearby. He had almost lost all of them. Not because he lacked money, but because he had allowed fear, secrecy, and jealousy to enter relationships that were more valuable than money. And that was the greatest lesson of his life. Money can buy a mansion, but it cannot buy loyalty. Money can buy a luxury car, but it cannot buy genuine friendship. Money can buy a wedding, but it cannot create true love. And sometimes, the people who truly love you are not the ones who stay when you have everything. They are the ones who remain when they believe you have nothing.